All right, I'll go ahead and get started then. So, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for coming for the food coma seminar. So my name is Nick Clevenger. I'm going to talk about rethinking testing React applications. So quick about me again. My name is Nick Clevenger. If you want to find me online, I'm Bo Diddley pretty much anywhere you'd be trying to look. Probably places I shouldn't be too. So about this talk, just to kind of give a little overview, a little heads up. It's entirely subjective. It's completely based off of my personal preference, opinions, gut feeling. I don't have empirical data to show that one thing is better than another. Really, really comes down to just how I feel about the tests that I'm writing. And we'll dive into that. What's important when you're evaluating, not just testing, but just anything, any tools, any libraries, technologies that you're using, is how does that fit for you? How does it fit for your team, for the project that you're working on? That could differ from each to each of those. So going to kind of go over some of the feelings that I feel are kind of drawbacks with kind of the typical testing model in React right now, and then go into a new testing library called React Testing Library that I've been enjoying using lately. Kind of dive into that just a little, and then at the end, really quick look at Cypress for end-to-end. If you guys are really interested in Cypress, and there's a talk after this one, specifically about going from Selenium to Cypress. That sounds cool. So I would check that out if you really want to get more info on Cypress. So start with something profound, earth-shaking, right? Change the way you guys think. Testing is important. Right? Duh, of course. We know testing's important, but exactly why? Like, we can talk about less bugs, protecting ourselves from regressions in our code, things like that. Ultimately, what comes down to is the confidence that we have in the code that we're shipping and the product that we're making. Having good tests, having good, not just good coverage, but good faith in the tests that we're using, helps us ship better code. And it keeps us from keeping like a jar of Tums and a pager on the nightstand. I don't want to get woken up in the middle of the night, and I want to sleep better knowing that my code's good. So we're talking about testing. We have to have something to test. Can anyone see that? It's really faint over here, is it?
Yeah, we should turn off one set of lights.
Sure. See if I can get the last one.
Better? You see it in the back? We're okay? All right, cool. Really not, well, I'm like, ooh, can you see it? It's really not that important. It's a super stupid, simple, contrived example. It's your typical kind of counter hello world React component. We have some simple state, a couple of click handlers, buttons, and we're displaying that state. And just to kind of show, like, it works. Hey, I click increment, it goes up. I click decrement. If I can click, it goes down. Right. So what's the typical testing of something like that look in React? So we're using Enzyme. So you'd be pulling in typically shallow from Enzyme, kind of what a lot of people use. You can use mount, render, whatever. But shallow rendering is kind of what I'm focusing on here. So pull in shallow, pull in the component we're testing. Test the initial state. So we're going to shallow render it, get that wrapper, find the span there, assert that it's displaying what we expect it to be. A number of different ways you could do it, but fairly typical. And then again, we're testing the behavior of clicking those buttons. Find the button. There's two buttons, so we got to get the first one, simulate a click on there, and again assert that we're displaying the value that we expect, and then same for the increment. All right. So if we run those tests, we'd expect we get 3 passing tests, right? So again, I'm talking about maybe moving away from shallow rendering a little bit. I was relying on it as much. So what is the case against shallow rendering sometimes? It can force us into thinking about testing the implementation details, right? Those previous tests look fine, but we'll see as we show some other examples that the API of shallow rendering kind of coaxes you into testing the implementation details. What you really want to be focusing on is the actual functionality of the app. And when we're doing that, it can give us false confidence. We can run into situations where the app is broken, but our tests are passing. So what use are those tests to us? Now, kind of feel like after discussions at lunch and things like that, I feel like I kind of maybe reworded the slide a little bit. But in case against shallow rendering, I would say probably a better way to say it is a case to more carefully think about how you're testing. It's not that shallow rendering is bad and it's going to lead you down this path. It's that my argument is that shallow rendering facilitates you to do that if you're not careful. You have to be careful. So to illustrate that, simple refactor. We're introducing this button component, right? So instead of directly rendering a button element, we've got some button component. Maybe there's some logic in there, it's a styled component, whatever, but whatever, it's hidden behind this abstraction that we've created. And since we're shallow rendering, we're not directly rendering that button anymore. So that means our tests are going to break, which really hard to see. I'm typing right. So we run the tests, and they're broken. Why? So, of course, we're trying to find that button, saying 0 instances of that node found, because the button's not there anymore. There's a capital B button component now, right? So tests are broken. No big deal. That's part, red, green refactor, right? Tests are broken. We've changed something. We update the tests, make the tests work. So we're going to update the tests. So here, we're going to reach into the instance of that component and call the decrement and increment handlers. There's other ways. Again, it's a simple example, so fully mounting this and going that way, not a big deal. But a lot of time, people kind of fall back to shallow anyway. But there's different ways you could find the button too, using different selectors within Enzyme. But this is pretty typical in what you see in examples. Is people grab the instance and try to do things off there. Oh, then just to show you, we update that. So we make that change, test against the instance methods, test pass. Feeding into that, we can run into where we're getting that false confidence from the tests that we're running against there. When we're rendering shallow, sometimes we're doing crazy things to make the test pass. We're mocking out a bunch of stuff. We're hiding the details of things lower in the render tree. And that is what allows for these situations where the app is broken, but the tests pass, because we're not really seeing the full picture. So another simple refactor. We're introducing another little abstraction. Instead of that span, we're going to use this display component. And again, this is super stupid, but down here we've got the display passing in a label and the value we want to display. Some of you might see where I'm going with the stupidity here, but so our new display, we're displaying the label. We have it the 1, we've got a 0, we increment, the value's going up, whatever. Great. That works. Yarnt. So we've made that change, but our tests are broken because that span's not there anymore, right? So the tests are broken, fix the tests. What are we going to do that? We're going to reach in, we're going to look directly at the state of the component. So the counter on there. The problem there, show you those tests work now. So the problem there, someone comes in on Friday, they're going to change our display where we have the label and the value separated as they should be. They're going to say, well, they're always passing in the label as a string, so I can just concat them this way, and it's fine, because JavaScript will coerce, and everything will be fine and dandy, except we're passing in a number, right? Again, stupid example, but you never know. Someone does this on Friday, checks it, pushes it to prod. What do we get? Oh, right? I was expecting a 1 and a 0. Now I've got just 1. Counter's supposed to start at 0. Why are we starting at 1? What's going on? Well, we're adding those strings together, so the app's broken. What does that mean for our tests? Tests are still passing. All right? App's not doing what we want it to do. Tests are still passing. Users are angry. We're getting pages. We're getting calls. No one's happy about this. So, back to why not shallow rendering. So why not shallow rendering? So we're testing those implementation details again. Like, our priority should be making sure that the app is working. It helps to zoom out, see the big picture of it. If we're zoomed in too close, we're not really seeing how the app should be functioning, and we're missing some of these. We get that false confidence. Something broken lower down in that render tree isn't going to necessarily show up because we're not testing it at that level, right? Maybe we don't even, like, sometimes people aren't writing tests against the super simple little display components like that. Maybe we might not catch that at all. And whereas I don't want to say to just throw out shallow rendering at all. Like I said, like, there are still components where I think not only is it good, it is what you should be doing. Particularly provider components. So if you're using the Create Context API, you've got to feed a value into that provider. So there's somewhere in your application where you're generating whatever you're feeding into that provider. You want to make sure that's getting created properly. You're not rendering UI around any of that. You want to test that shallow rendering's perfect place because that's where you want to reach into the instance and make sure that those things are happening the way that they should. And then pure logic components, things like I think about render prop components where you're delegating the rendering to somewhere else. You want to test that. Shallow rendering is a perfect spot to do things like that. If you're doing like a fetch component, things like that, where there's just logic. So as an alternative to using shallow rendering, many of you might know that a very prolific open source contributor named Kent C. Dodds, who works for PayPal, created a React testing library. And kind of the ethos around it is testing the UI from the user perspective, not from like the developer's perspective, not testing the implementation details. Focus on that big picture of what you're testing, giving you a much higher confidence, which again, the confidence being the thing that we really want to get out of our tests. So to test, in testing from the perspective of the user, so gives it a bunch of different, so get and query by functions that the library provides for finding elements, interacting with elements on your page, directly through the DOM. So different than, and it's different than just using typical like class select CSS selectors or just grabbing the particular DOM element, things like that. And because of that, it forces you to think about your content in a more semantic way, a more user-oriented way. So, for instance, you want to get a button. I want to test that the save button is doing what it needs to do. You're going to get by text save. You're going to call get by text and pass it save to get that exact button. You're not looking for a .btn class with a .save class, things like that. You're really thinking about it from the user perspective because they're going to be looking for the button that says save. Because of that, also, it pushes us towards a more accessible UI. It's a slight nudge. Like it's not going to force you to all of a sudden start putting ARIA attributes and things on everything, but we should have labels for all of our input elements, right? When we're doing forms and things like that. So if you want to test a form, you have an input element that you want to find, you can get it by the label text. We should have those associated. It works screen readers need that stuff. And then we're asserting that the user behavior is driving the app, not the implementation details. Right? We're asserting that clicking the save button is doing the saving, not calling the function on the instance of the component that's doing it. So No more focusing on the implementation details. So here's what a test with testing that same component with React testing library would look like. Pulling in our imports, we have the render, fire event, and cleanup. You'll see those down a little bit. And then the just DOM extend expect just some nice helper add-on assertions for dealing with the asserting against the DOM. One thing, because we're doing a full render and it's using JS DOM to do the full render, you want to clean up after each test. If you're not doing that, then you're going to bleed in between and you're going to run into issues. So kind of come back to that later. So testing that initial state. So we're rendering and we're getting out of there the get by text, get by test ID, finding what we're getting by test ID. Why do I still have a get by text there? That's bad. I'm not even using it. But and we're just asserting that the display has the text that we expect it to, and then similar checking that behavior. The main thing in here is fire event, any DOM events that you want to fire are hung off of that object. So you have focus, blur, change, all the things off of there that you want to manipulate DOM.
So you say this is like more content oriented and less DOM element oriented?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Does that maybe not work out when the content is dynamic?
No, I mean it's still like you can. So there's a whole number of different ways. Like if you don't have text or you don't have a label, things like that, you can attach a test ID. There are still things in there where you can find it by class selector and things like that. It's somewhat discouraged in the just like kind of the ethos of the library, but those are still there. So your typical ways of interacting with the DOM and finding elements in the DOM are still there. If it's dynamic and you might not know right off the bat what's going to be there.
The content is usually the more dynamic part. The elements are usually the more static part unless you refactor. So this is like it seems like it's like fixing one problem and substituting another problem maybe?
I can see what you're saying then, yeah.
Okay. I don't know. I don't have any experience with it. So.
Yeah, no, it's worked well for me so far, but nothing's perfect. I'm sure something will pop up.
Yeah.
A quick question.
Yeah.
When you're doing get by test ID, where is that test ID defined? Or are we gonna talk about that later?
Oh, so it's just a data dash test ID. It's just a data attribute.
Okay.
I don't particularly like doing that as much, having that on there. I mean, you can do stuff in the build stuff that'll strip out the not shipping that to production, things like that. But for this particular instance, I just have it in there because it's just a span, and I was trying to hurry and get these done, so I wasn't trying to have any styling or anything. So yeah, for instances like that, you can attach the test ID, and that's just that function's built into the library, so you can get those just with the data attribute. But so within the fire event, then I'm calling the get by text, and I think that's the part that I realize is we're getting by text that each of those buttons. So again, we're thinking about it from what the user sees. We're getting that button based off of what the text on that button is, and then interacting with it.
So that kind of covers you in two ways, right? Because number one way is if they didn't change the name of the button, it still exists. And way number two is if the on-click fails, that test would fail.
Yep.
As well.
Yep.
And it would throw, right? It would throw an error if you changed it from
So
decrement to decrement.
Yeah.
It would fail.
Yep. Yeah, I wouldn't be able to find it. So yeah. So yeah, those tests are passing. So we can feel more confident. So the full render means we're not hiding the child components. We're doing that full render of it. So we're getting that full picture. If the app's broken for the user, the test should be broken for us. We're asserting that the content is correct, not the state, right? Because ultimately obviously we want the state to be correct. And so, but if the state's right, but we're still doing something stupid when we're displaying it, what good is that to the user? All right. So no more false positives. I'm pulling in just the same component that pulled in that bad display that broke the app, but the tests were still passing. But these tests are still doing what the previous test was. tests break like we would expect them to. We want them to be broken, right? So it's expecting to have 1 and 1, but we're getting 2. So it's telling us that the app's broken now, which is nice. That's what we want. We want our test to tell us that something's not working right. So again, a little love for the API. I think that's the main thing that I've really enjoyed with it, is just that I really like how the API feels from a developer experience. The get and query methods are really nice to work with, particularly when I'm testing forms. If I've got, at my job, we'd have massive forms that were kind of just like, dozens and dozens of fields on them. And being able to just say, get by label text, boom, and then fill out, fire the change event, fill it out. I can do like a nice full fill out of that form really simply, really clean, just a couple lines of code for each field.
It's finding the content in a deep sense. So if a component that I'm testing has a child component, which has a child component, which has some text, I can query that whole.
It's doing a full render, so it's going all. So if you render all the way at app.jsx, it's going to render the whole full thing.
Yeah, so you can think of it like essentially it's rendering the whole thing. It's taking the tree, calling toString on it, and then it's doing searches on the string that is the HTML content that will be returned.
Does that imply that you could write performance tests? Track against performance, rendering performance?
I don't know that I would with JS DOM. Yeah.
JS DOM is still like a fake environment, right?
Yeah.
So it's not going to give you good performance. Like you could track like whether your performance is getting better or worse.
Yeah.
Compared to a baseline.
Yeah.
You just care, is there a strong deviation here?
Yeah.
Yeah, but like for instance, like let's say I added a huge dependency that's like 16 megs, right? But it has nothing to do with render. JS DOM is going to perform very fast, but your performance is total garbage, right? So it helps you track render performance, but not like actual user-based performance, right?
Yep.
Does this render the whole app with every test, or just the things in that component down?
So basically, whatever you're passing into render. So if you're rendering the entire app, like if you're calling render app, and that's your very root object that you're passing into like React DOM.render, then yes, you're rendering the full app with everyone. Would not recommend doing that. Like, definitely think about where you're testing it. But yeah, it renders the whole tree down from the component that you are rendering. And again, like you saw, the Just DOM provides some real helpful extensions, like to have text content, to have style. Actually, I will say one caveat on the to have style. I don't know if anyone uses styled components, and I'm guessing it'd be the same if you use like emotion, but something with, I think it's a bug in JS DOM, but the styles don't get injected into the head until after the fact, apparently. Like, so there's some sort of race condition there, so that if you call to have style and you're verifying that, like, your style component turned red because of something, like they're hovering or something like that, that's going to fail. So, but if you're doing like inline styles in JSX, or if you're just doing regular CSS, that's all there
You
for you.
couldn't probably select by class either with style components due to the hashing.
Yeah, probably not. I don't think I would want to anyway, though, with those hashed class names. But yeah, I don't think they'll be there to pull against. I think that is just a bug in JS DOM. So some arguments I have seen against using React Testing Library about what it's trying to do is that, well, this is integration testing. This isn't unit testing, right? And I need to unit test the logic that's inside my components. So kind of cover those two. So integration versus unit. I think this tweet by Guillermo Rauch was kind of the inception point for Kent C. Dodds writing this library. But he tweeted, write tests, not too many, mostly integration. So kind of breaking that apart, like we already covered that testing's important. None of us would be in this room talking about it if we didn't believe that. Not too many. Having too many tests is a nightmare to maintain. I don't know how many of you run into that, but like if you're testing absolutely everything, then there's always tests breaking whenever you do something. No matter, like, ultimately we don't want our tests to break when we're refactoring, but it seems to happen. And the more tests you have, the harder that gets to maintain. So you want to find that balance. And then mostly integration, this is kind of where the real personal preference piece kicks in. But I think he feels, and I agree, integration testing is what gives us that higher confidence. Like unit testing is important, but integration testing really gives us that bigger picture. And I think that's kind of where Kent Dodds was going with this library, and kind of where my buy-in comes is the focus. We should put more focus on the integration testing piece than on the unit testing piece. And I think unit testing was always easier. Integration testing was always a pain in the butt. It's getting easier to do integration testing with some of these tools. I think it makes more sense to put the focus there. So that's what gives us the confidence. Yeah.
I'd say one of the big arguments against heavy loading or integration testing is they tend to perform much worse.
They
so
do.
You can't have them constantly running. But it seems like these tests were constantly running, and you can just check.
And I mean, these are going to be slower. You are doing a full render against JS DOM. If you're shallow rendering an enzyme, it's not doing that. It's like these will be slower. But again, I go back to the not too many piece. Like if you're replacing, so if you went in and replaced every single one of your shallow rendered tests with a full rendered test from React Testing Library, I would say that's a very bad idea. You've just extended the length of your test run time by quite a bit. It's really thinking about what are the pieces that we're testing, right? So then on the I need to test the unit logic. I need to unit test the logic within my components, right? Do I? Yeah, I'll refer you back to the GIF earlier. Absolutely, we need to. But one thing I think is too much logic in our UI is a code smell, right? If we're having to reach in and test instance methods all the time, that's a time to think, can I pull this out into its own module and unit test that? Not always possible. Sometimes things are coupled in such a way that we can't pull that out. But it's like I look at it and say, why do I have all this in this component? Can I pull this out somewhere? So yeah, like I said, mocking instance methods, another code smell. Move it into a module if possible, and still unit test that. I'm not saying stop unit testing. We need to unit test. That's very important. Main thing is test the UI in sensible chunks. Right? We want to test at the highest level that makes sense. And so I think about it kind of like how we think about state in React, or like using actual component local state. It's a good practice to lift our state up to where it makes the most sense. So why not lift our tests up in the same way, right? Like in state, if our state is too low within the application and we need to share that across somewhere, it needs to go somewhere else, it's impossible. We can't see that big picture. That's a nightmare to pass around. So similar with tests, we can't see the big picture. We're testing implementation details when we're down that low. So again, with state, if we have it way too up, like if we just keep all of our state up in the root component and we're passing it down, it's a nightmare, right? We're passing it down, passing props down. Like that's where Redux came from, so we don't have to deal with that as much. Just passing down through the tree. Again, if we lift our tests up way too high, we're too zoomed out, it's harder to make those tests work. So if we're rendering that full root component, the tests are slow. You're probably missing edge cases. You're not thinking, like there's no way that you can wrap your mind around all of the edge cases for testing if you're testing at way too high of a level. So that's React Testing Library. Real quick, I just wanted to go into Cypress. Anyone played with Selenium before? Yeah, that's always a nightmare, right? No one's ever gotten to work and say, "Yay, I get to write Selenium tests today." Woohoo! Cypress is really pretty cool. It's easy to get started with. The API is super nice to work with, and of course, I think Kent C. Dodds also created a Cypress testing library to give some of the similar API for finding DOM elements and stuff to test against. Get a quick. Oh yeah, that's up here. Yeah. So I just wrote, again, super stupid little app that we had, just using kind of a modified version of that counter. But random name degrees of Kevin Bacon, just a bunch of random names and whichever degrees of Kevin Bacon they possess. So super stupid. again, like not trying to. But so testing is really easy in here. Like you don't even have to import anything. Cypress hangs everything off the global. It's got its own separate runner, so you're not running it through Jest. But your typical BDD block of describe before each it. But so in the before each here, what I'm doing, I'm mock. So you can mock out the back end. I'll kind of talk about that a little bit later. But is it, the argument to be made, am I doing an end-to-end test if I'm mocking out my network calls? But you can do that. That's what so site.server is kind of starting that, and then calling site.route on each of the things that I want to mock out, and then you can use fixtures. So I just have a JSON file shoved off somewhere, and it'll pull that. It knows like it's, convention over configuration. If you have the JSON files in the place where they need to be, you can pull that and just it'll feed that data for you automatically. And then call site.visit, similar to what you do any other UI testing library. Visit the root of the app. And then we want to find the button, so I'm calling site.get, and then the selectors that are within there. And again, I don't have any nice styling or anything in there. Didn't really add anything, so not the nicest selector for it, but it was as simple as I could get it without spending more time than I wanted to. Then call click, and then get the value, and then you can assert with the .should. This is one thing I don't necessarily like as much about Cypress is the assertions are strings that you're putting in. So I don't really like magic strings. I will mistype them and then wonder why my tests are blowing up. So that's a bit of a pain point for me. The other thing is in Cypress, everything is a promise. So everything that you're chaining off of that side dot whatever is returning a promise. So if you start it feels like it's synchronous, but it's not. So you might feel like you can do side dot whatever and then chain off of that, and you not necessarily can. So you run into that every once in a while. So I'll show you how what the test runner looks like. So when you call, basically you just run it from the command line, like Cypress open, and it'll pull all your spec files. And I've only got the one, but it will open up, or it won't because I have that Chrome browser full screened. And then it'll open it over here. See if I can. Of course, I zoom in and it zooms the test part, but not over here. But so you can see over here, it's rendering the app and it's pulling that fixture data. So I've got just Simpsons characters instead of the random names that are getting populated by my API because I have that mocked out. Over here on the left, you can see each of the tests. They're passing. When you click on one, you get this command log. And what's really cool here, you can see each of the commands that you're firing in the test, and you can hover over. So like here is here's the API call of getting it. And as you hover over, it's taking a snapshot before and after those happen. So you can see, okay, before the page was blank, we didn't have any data. After, now we've got the data that's showing. And it's telling here it was stubbed out too, so you can kind of really get a good picture. Getting the button, clicking, and when you click, it even shows you get the nice little red dot showing exactly which button you're clicking, and all the way through. The other really nice thing was when you saw the ugly selector in there for getting the button. If you want to find a particular element to get it and interact with it, you can click that target button. Go, hover over any one, click on it. It's going to give you that selector, and you see the side.get up there. If you come over, you can click the copy to keyboard. That's actually going to copy. I'll just put it up in that address bar. You actually get the full, so you can just paste that right into your code. You have it. You don't have to hunt around, try to type out that big, long, ugly selector that might be in there. Really nice, slick way to get through your testing. The slides. So on the mocking, again, like, is it really end to end? If I'm mocking it out, I'm like, yeah, probably not. It's more of an integration test. But like, you have to consider your environment. You might be calling against a public a public third party API. You can't necessarily, like, you don't want to necessarily be hitting your rate limited or things like that. If you can test against a real back end, then awesome. If you've got a fully containerized environment, you can spin up test databases, things like that. That's awesome. Do a full end to end, see the full picture working.
About that. So in like the existing systems, like if I'm using Jest in there right now, if I have like, let's say auth0 is like the authenticator, I would just use like their library to pull in job token, and then I would use like Axios or something to send it in header. How do they provide authentication mechanisms for testing it?
So there's a couple ways you can go about it. You can write that whole interaction of login. So if you've got like a test user or something that you wanted to log in using auth0, you can do that whole thing, and you can build custom commands within Cypress. So you can create your own like sci.login command, and you can preface that before every test. So actually go through and log in. So then, as the test run, because it's running within Chrome there, your token's there. The other way you could do it is you could fake the token and drop it into local storage or wherever it might be. It's up to you. You can go soup to nuts, or you can fake out pieces if you need to. Again, it comes down to finding that balance of what you're testing. Sometimes automating those login pieces is a pain in the butt, and they even mention that in their documentation, saying like login is one of the most difficult pieces, and they have some documentation about how to maybe go about it, but
I've done a lot with Jest.
Yeah.
But for something like this, it's more necessary.
Yeah. But again, if you can test against the full thing, like that's going to give you the best picture of it. But if you can't, don't skip doing the tests. Mock that out. At least get the picture of the front end working the way that it should in the browser that you think like JSDOM's awesome for getting quick tests running, but nothing beats running in a real browser. And Cypress, I think I think right now it's just running on Chrome, but they're going to be bringing they're going to have runners for Edge, Firefox. I think someone even mentioned IE. So they must have gotten some really good seed money to pay someone to do that. But so yeah, test like a user. Right? We want to think about our tests. We want to think about our applications from how the user is interacting with it. React testing library, Cypress, I think, encourage this thought process. We want to zoom out a little bit. I think as developers, we have a tendency to think about our applications from the developer perspective, from the perspective of being inside the code. I think it's harder sometimes to remove ourselves and think about the application and how it's actually being used by our users. When we do that, we can be much more confident in what our tests are telling us. So we can go on vacation for a week after Friday and not be worried about getting calls and having to VPN in and fix crap when should be on the beach having fun somewhere and our spouses are angry and whatnot. So like I said, confidence is the main thing, and confidence is better than coverage in my mind. I'd rather have a 50% coverage of the vital parts of our application and be 100% confident in those tests that are covering that, than to have 100% coverage but have very little faith in what that's telling me, because that's how my stock in Zantac goes up. So we got some links here. The slides are available online. I'll have the link on the next one, but links to React testing libraries just on Kent C. Dodd's GitHub. Cypress is at cypress.io. That's pretty much it. Slides are available there at rethinkingtesting.netlify.com. The demo code and the markup for the slides. I'm using MDX deck for the slides, which is actually pretty cool. And again, I'm Bo Diddley everywhere on Twitter. Thanks. Anybody have any questions or?